In 1987, a strange contradiction rolled off the assembly line. Engineers designed a vehicle that looked like it belonged on a farm, a square heavy block of steel meant for hard labor. But inside, they filled it with features you would expect in a penthouse suite: a refrigerator capable of making ice, deep plush velour seats, and a level of finish more like a living room than a work truck. It was a mix of industrial utility and high-end comfort. Why put such luxury into a machine built for abuse? It was a vision of a future where premium meant unbreakable, but that future never happened. This is the Nissan Patrol Y60. Why did Nissan believe luxury and durability had to go together? The answer lies in a decision that changed everything. To appreciate the arrival of the Y60, one must first understand the landscape of the mid-1980s. It was a time of stark utilitarianism. If you wanted a vehicle capable of crossing a continent, you accepted a brutal compromise. You bought a truck. It might have had a wagon body and some carpet, but underneath, it was agricultural machinery. The heavy-duty segment was dominated by vehicles like the Toyota Land Cruiser 60 series and the previous Nissan Patrol Y60. These machines were defined by their suspension. They relied on leaf springs at all four corners. This technology dates back to the horse and cart. Leaf springs are incredibly strong and can carry immense loads, but they suffer from interleaf friction. As the metal layers slide against each other, they resist small movements, translating every crack in the pavement into a shock wave through the chassis. Driving these vehicles was a physical act. A trip across the country was an exercise in endurance, leaving you vibrating from road noise and exhausted from the constant corrections needed to keep the vehicle in a straight line. There was also the issue of articulation. Leaf springs are stiff. When one wheel hits a bump, the stiffness of the pack limits how far the axle can twist. In technical terrain, this meant wheels would lift off the ground easily. When a wheel is in the air, it has zero traction. To compensate, drivers had to rely on momentum, charging at obstacles with speed. This was hard on the vehicle and dangerous for the occupants. It was a driving experience defined by harshness. Yet, the people buying these machines were changing. The 1980s saw the birth of the recreational four-wheel drive boom. It was no longer just farmers and geologists. Families wanted to escape the city. They wanted to explore the remote corners of the map, but the hardware had not caught up with the desire. Manufacturers were stuck in a cycle of stagnation. They would add a striped package or a chrome grille, but the fundamental architecture remained crude. It was the era of the wagon body bolted onto a commercial truck chassis. This limitation created a ceiling on comfort. You could add plush seats, but if the axle underneath was bouncing uncontrollably over corrugations, the passengers would still feel it. There was a growing hunger for something that offered civilization without sacrificing strength. The market was waiting for a vehicle that could handle the daily commute and a desert crossing without punishing the driver. The heavy-duty segment was resting on its reputation for durability while ignoring the evolving needs of the human beings inside the cabin. The interiors of these older vehicles reflected this lack of refinement. They were loud, with engine noise dominating the cabin. The dashboards were sparse, offering only the most critical information. Air conditioning was often an afterthought, a unit bolted under the dash rather than integrated into it. It was a landscape of compromise. The industry seemed to believe that if you wanted durability, you had to suffer for it. But in the design studios of Nissan, a different idea was taking shape. They were preparing to challenge the assumption that strength and comfort were mutually exclusive. They were about to introduce a level of intentionality that would change the segment forever. In November 1987, the heavy-duty market was broken by a radical shift. When Nissan unveiled the Y60, they did not present a slightly better truck. They presented a rejection of the established order. Engineers looked at the punishing ride of the competition and decided the era of agricultural compromise was over. In a move viewed by traditionalists as risky, they abandoned leaf springs entirely. For the first time in the Japanese heavy-duty sector, a vehicle arrived with coil springs on all four corners. This was a profound revolution. Leaf springs rely on steel plates sliding against one another, creating friction that resists movement. Small inputs, like ripples on a gravel road, are often transmitted directly to the chassis because the force is not enough to overcome this friction. The suspension effectively locks up over minor imperfections. A coil spring suffers from no such limitation. It is a single, continuous spiral of steel that compresses with almost zero internal friction. It is sensitive to the smallest nuance of the terrain. When the Y60 moved over a rough surface, the suspension could react instantly, absorbing high-frequency vibrations that would rattle the teeth of a driver in a 60 Series Land Cruiser. This created a sensation that was almost alien to four-wheel drive owners of the time. The vehicle seemed to float over corrugations rather than crash through them. It introduced the concept of compliance to a segment that had only ever known rigidity. However, simply installing coils was not enough. The challenge with coil springs is that, unlike leaf springs, they cannot hold the axle in place laterally or longitudinally. They just hold the weight up. This necessitated a complex system of control arms to locate the axles. The front utilized a 3-link arrangement, but the rear suspension was a masterpiece of over-engineering. Nissan implemented a 5-link live axle design. 4 heavy-duty control arms located the axle fore and aft, while a panhard rod kept it centered. This geometry prevented the axle from twisting under heavy acceleration, a problem known as axle tramp that plagued powerful leaf-sprung vehicles. It meant that the power from the engine was translated directly into forward motion, rather than wasted in the juddering of the rear end. It gave the vehicle a sense of planted stability that belied its height and weight. This setup also unlocked a new level of off-road capability through articulation. Because the coil springs were long and the control arms were carefully pivoted, the axles could twist to extreme angles. In technical terrain, where a stiff leaf-sprung truck would lift a wheel and lose momentum, the Y60 could drop a tire deep into a rut while keeping the body relatively level. It kept the rubber on the ground. In the world of four-wheeling, traction is a function of contact, and the Y60 maintained contact in situations where its rivals simply ran out of travel. To support this sophisticated undercarriage, the physical footprint of the vehicle had to change. Coil springs are inherently softer than heavy leaf packs, which can lead to increased body roll in corners. To counteract this, Nissan widened the track of the vehicle significantly. This gave birth to the wide body stance that defines the silhouette of the Y60. With its blistered fender flares and broad shoulders, it looked planted and immovable. This width was not just for stability. It allowed the designers to maximize the internal volume of the cabin. The body sides were near vertical, and the roofline was high, creating a cube-like efficiency that refused to taper for the sake of aerodynamics. It was a design that prioritized the passenger experience, creating a vast, airy environment. The suspension had successfully isolated the occupants from the violence of the road, creating a stable platform. But this mechanical serenity was just the foundation. It set the stage for an interior that would introduce a level of opulence previously reserved for luxury sedans, and it was unlike anything the market had ever seen. To grasp the ambition behind the Y60, we must look to its homeland. In the Japanese domestic market, it was sold as the Nissan Safari. The late 1980s in Japan was the era of the bubble economy, a time of unprecedented financial optimism. Corporations were flush with capital, and for a brief moment, accountants lost control of engineering departments. The mandate was not to build to a price point, but to build the absolute best machine technology would allow. In this atmosphere of unrestricted budgets, the Safari became a vessel for features that defined the concept of lost luxury. The engineers did not stop at suspension. They made a choice that seems almost absurd by today's standards. Consider the center console. Modern luxury SUVs might have a cooled compartment where a vent blows cool air. It is passive and weak. The Y60 Safari offered something entirely different, a fully integrated factory-installed refrigerator and ice maker. This was serious engineering, plumbed directly into the vehicle's high-pressure air conditioning lines. It used the main compressor to circulate refrigerant through a dedicated evaporator, complete with a specialized tray designed to hold water steady as it froze into cubes. Think about the audacity of this feature. The designers decided that true luxury was the ability to serve a glass of iced water to your passengers while traversing the dunes of the Sahara or the humid forests of Southeast Asia. It required complex plumbing, extra valves, and valuable interior space. It added weight and complexity, but they built it because it elevated the human experience of the journey. It turned the cabin into a sanctuary that could defy the thermodynamics of the environment outside. It was a declaration that civilization did not have to end where the pavement did. Then there was the instrumentation. On the highest trim levels, a distinctive pod sat on top of the dashboard. This was the adventure cluster. It housed an altimeter and an inclinometer. Today, if a vehicle tells you your pitch and roll angle, it is a digital readout buried 3 sub-menus deep on a touchscreen. It is data without soul, rendered by a processor. The Y60 used physics. The inclinometer was a purely analog instrument. A floating sphere or a weighted needle moved in a bath of damping fluid, reacting to gravity as the vehicle tilted. Watching that needle sway gently as the nose of the truck pointed toward the sky on a steep climb offered a tactile satisfaction that pixels cannot replicate. It was a physical reminder of the vehicle's purpose. Even when the owner was stuck in gridlock in downtown Tokyo, they were looking at instruments designed for the Himalayas. It connected the daily commute to the potential for adventure. It gave the dashboard a sense of depth and utility that modern flat screens have completely erased. The definition of luxury materials was also distinct. In the modern era, leather is the default signifier of wealth. But leather has flaws. It is scorching hot in the summer, freezing in the winter, and slippery when the vehicle is bouncing off-road. The top specification Kings Road models of the Safari rejected this norm. They utilized high-grade velour and a material called hexane, a premium synthetic suede. To the modern eye, accustomed to wipe-clean surfaces, it might look like a relic of the past, but to the touch, it was vastly superior. This fabric breathed. It gripped the driver's clothing, holding them securely in place during cornering. It was soft, warm, and inviting. It was chosen for comfort and durability, not just for how it looked in a brochure. These fabrics have survived decades of use, often outlasting the cracked and peeling leather seats of their contemporaries. It was a material choice that prioritized the user's physical comfort over the visual status of leather. Finally, the front of the vehicle featured a detail that has largely vanished from the automotive world: headlight wipers. These were not the high-pressure spray jets found on modern cars, which merely mist the lens with fluid. These were actual miniature wiper arms, driven by their own dedicated electric motors. They were a statement of serious intent. They implied that this vehicle was expected to push through mud, snow, and slush deep enough to cake the headlights. It was a feature borrowed from high-end European sedans, adapted for the brutality of the trail. These features, the ice maker, the analog gauges, the plush fabric, and the wipers, were not just a random list of options. They were a cohesive argument about what a car should be. And they represented a belief that has almost completely vanished from the automotive industry, that a machine could be rugged without being crude. They suggested that the driver deserved to be cared for, even in the harshest environments. The luxury of the Y60 was not about isolation from the mechanical experience. It was about a seamless integration with it. This luxury was not just about comfort, but about mechanical symbiosis. That symbiosis was most evident in how the vehicle managed traction. In the modern automotive world, capability is often a product of software. When a wheel slips today, a computer senses the change in rotation speed and rapidly pulses the brake caliper on that corner to simulate grip. It is a reactive system, an intervention designed to correct a mistake. The Y60 operated on a different principle. It defined luxury as the seamless integration of rugged capability, giving the driver mechanical tools to alter the physics of the chassis before the trouble even started. It was about prevention rather than correction. This philosophy is best illustrated by the rear stabilizer release mechanism. Every suspension engineer faces a fundamental conflict. To make a tall, heavy wagon safe on the highway, you need a stiff metal bar connecting the left and right wheels. This stabilizer bar prevents the body from leaning dangerously during a corner. However, off the road, that same bar becomes a liability. It ties the wheels together, preventing them from moving independently. If one wheel drops into a deep rut, the stiffness of the bar pulls the other wheel down with it, often lifting a tire into the air. When a tire is airborne, it does zero work. The Y60 solved this with a lever next to the driver's seat. When the terrain became uneven, the driver simply pulled it. A cable system physically pulled a pin in a disconnect unit on the rear sway bar link. With a satisfying thud, the bar separated, freeing the rear axle to move without restriction. The wheels could articulate to extreme angles while the body remained level. A light on the dashboard glowed orange, reading "Stobby off." It gave the operator the power to mechanically reconfigure the suspension on the fly. When articulation alone was not enough, the Y60 offered another mechanical absolute, the vacuum-operated rear differential lock. While lesser vehicles relied on limited slip differentials that used friction plates to vaguely suggest that both wheels should turn, the Nissan system was decisive. A switch on the center console sent an electrical signal to solenoids mounted on the firewall. These solenoids opened a valve, allowing engine vacuum to travel through a line down to the rear axle. This vacuum pressure pushed a heavy steel collar into place inside the differential housing, physically locking the axle shafts together. The result was instant. Both rear wheels were forced to rotate at the exact same speed. It did not matter if one wheel was on dry pavement and the other in slick mud. The engine's torque was applied with 100% efficiency. It was a violent, effective solution, requiring decision-making from the driver rather than intervention from a microchip. Perhaps the ultimate expression of this heavy-duty philosophy was the winch. Most off-roaders today bolt on an electric winch. These are convenient, but they have severe thermal limits. Under heavy load, the electric motors generate immense heat and drain the battery rapidly. They require rest periods to cool down. Nissan offered a different solution with the Power Takeoff, or PTO winch. This device did not rely on electricity. It was connected directly to the vehicle's transfer case by a dedicated steel drive shaft running under the chassis. This meant the winch was driven by the massive combustion engine under the hood. As long as the engine was running and had fuel, the winch could pull. It had an effectively infinite duty cycle. You could winch a convoy of trucks up a mountain pass all day long, and the system would never overheat. The speed of the retrieval was controlled by the driver's right foot on the accelerator. It was industrial machinery disguised as a car accessory. The engineers knew this system was so powerful, it could literally tear the vehicle's frame apart if the line snagged on an immovable object. So they installed a mechanical fuse. Inside the winch mechanism was a small brass shear pin. If the load exceeded the structural safety limit of the chassis, the pin would snap, disconnecting the drive instantly. It was a brilliant, simple failsafe. It protected the expensive hardware by sacrificing a 10-cent part. This was engineering purity. But while the mechanical soul of the machine remained untainted, the badge on the grille was about to tell a complicated story of corporate strategy. While the engineering was pure, the commercial reality surrounding the Y60 was becoming strange. In Australia, a government initiative known as the Button Car Plan forced competitors to become partners. The goal was to rationalize the industry through model sharing. From 1988 to 1994, you could walk into a Ford dealership and buy a Nissan Patrol called the Ford Maverick. To the uninitiated, they looked distinct, with different grills and taillights. But beneath the skin, they were twins. Mechanically identical, they rolled off the same assembly lines in Japan, sharing the same coil-sprung chassis, bulletproof drivelines, and engines. The Maverick was often positioned as the working man's alternative. While the Nissan badge carried the prestige of the top-tier T models with their electric amenities, the Ford version was frequently sold in lower trim levels. Today, this badge engineering offers a secret backdoor for enthusiasts. A Ford Maverick is simply a Y60 in a disguise. It commands a lower price on the used market because it lacks the correct logo on the grille, yet it possesses every ounce of the mechanical soul that makes the platform legendary. It is a lesson in how branding can obscure substance. As the 90s progressed, the Y60 had to evolve. The raw mechanical nature of the early models began to receive a layer of digital refinement. In 1992, Nissan introduced the Series 2 update. This was the moment the vehicle stepped cautiously toward the modern era. The most significant change was found under the hood of the petrol models. The trusty carburetor was retired. The new 4.2-liter engine, designated the TB42E, featured electronic fuel injection. For purists, this was a mixed blessing. A carburetor can be fixed with a screwdriver in the middle of nowhere. An injection system requires a diagnostic computer. However, this shift changed the character of the machine. The injection system used sensors to manage the burn. It made the engine smoother, easier to start, and slightly more powerful. It was the first sign that the age of purely mechanical operation was ending. Alongside the engine updates, the body was strengthened. Side intrusion bars were added inside the doors to protect occupants during a crash. Larger brakes were fitted to better manage the momentum of 2.5 tons of steel. The suspension was tweaked for better road manners. The Series 2 was a better car on paper. It was safer, cleaner, and more reliable, but it also marked the beginning of a transition away from the analog purity of the original 1987 launch. The connection between the driver and the machine was now mediated by electronics. By the time production wound down in 1997, the automotive landscape had shifted again. The demand for SUVs was exploding, but the definition of what an SUV should be was changing. The Y60 was about to be replaced, but it would refuse to die. Instead of fading away, it would find a second life in specific cultures that valued its strength above all else. But the Y60's story did not end in 1997. In fact, it was just beginning. In one corner of the world, this machine became something the engineers never intended. Something extreme. Even after the assembly lines in Japan finally went silent in 1997, the Y60 did not fade into history. Instead, it migrated, finding a vibrant and violent afterlife in the deserts of the Middle East. Here, the vehicle is not a museum piece, but a platform for extreme performance. The immense strength of the driveline made it the perfect canvas for high-horsepower builds. It is common to see these boxy wagons producing 4 times their factory power output, climbing the steepest dunes of the Liwa Oasis. In the drifting culture known as Tafit, the Y60 is revered for its structural immortality. When a modern SUV hits a rut sideways, aluminum control arms buckle. The solid steel axles of the Patrol simply absorb the impact. It survives because it was built with a safety margin that modern cost accountants would deem wastefully expensive. It is a testament to a philosophy that valued longevity over lightness. Meanwhile, in the vast outback of Australia, it cemented its legacy as the ultimate touring machine. It was the affordable workhorse that allowed ordinary families to circumnavigate the continent. However, keeping these machines alive today reveals the specific vulnerabilities of the era. While the mechanical components are nearly indestructible, the soft materials have begun to surrender to time. The dashboard is the most notorious casualty. Under the relentless ultraviolet radiation, the vinyl separates from the foam, creating a characteristic bubbling effect that plagues almost every surviving example. Restorers now hunt for years to find a pristine dashboard, treating it as a holy grail. Rust often claims the rear sliding window frames, a reminder of 1980s steel protection. The specific parts that defined its luxury status, the Kings Road cool box solenoids, the headlight wiper motors, and the analog inclinometers are becoming unobtainium. This scarcity highlights the difference between the Y60 and the vehicles that replaced it. A modern car is a collection of sealed units designed to be discarded when they fail. The Y60 was a collection of mechanical systems designed to be disassembled, greased, and rebuilt. The era of the Y60 was the era of repair. The Nissan Patrol Y60 stands as a definitive marker of a bygone era. It was created at the intersection of increasing consumer wealth and peak mechanical engineering. It offered a version of luxury that was not defined by software versions or touchscreens, but by tactile substance and capability. The lost luxury of this machine is the feeling of a velour seat that grips the driver on a 40-degree incline. and the satisfaction of pulling a physical lever to engage a differential lock. It represents a time when engineers, not marketers, made the final decisions. The industry has traded this mechanical permanence for the convenience of disposable technology. Yet, for those who understand the value of engineering, the Y60 remains a teacher. It serves as a reminder that true luxury is not a feature list. It is the absolute reliability to get back from anywhere. The heavy, over-engineered soul of the Mechanical Monarch is something the market may never see again. If you appreciate the weight of history and the sound of a mechanical door latch, share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more stories about the machines lost to time.